Is the Russian political class talking openly about revolution? This seems like a huge step for the Russian elite. But just what exactly does it mean, and who is really behind all this? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's May 30th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, I'll tell you guys, I'll just check this map real quick. There are actually no real frontline updates much of anywhere, but I did just want to point that out, right? We're also looking at about just 27 combat engagements. You notice absolutely none in Bakhmut. And I do also, it is worth noting, you notice that there's a huge uptick in artillery strikes in and around the Bakhmut area. This is not an accident. This is what you would do when conducting a relief in place. What you want to do is use your artillery or indirect fire to fix the enemy in their current locations because you are conducting a relief in place. Because your forces are in a vulnerable state, you're going to create literally a curtain of artillery that's going to stop the enemy from attacking you as you're switching out troops, switching out positions. So a very, you'll never see a cleaner look at how you can use artillery as a screen to cover a relief in place. Just want to point that little detail out there before we start talking about the real madness. But before we get into that, first, I wanted to shout out my newsletter, the Strategic Sitrep. Every single, if you're going to, okay, I started this because there's so many clickbait headlines in the national security space. They oftentimes will remove important context. And so I launched the Strategic Sitrep. You can subscribe for free at strategicsitrep.com/subscribe. And as you can see, we are breaking down the week's most relevant stories, not just in the Ukraine conflict, but we also give you a so what. So you get the context you need to understand why it's relevant in the deeper and wider national security space. We talk about Japan, a notoriously neutral country, ramping up its sanctions against Russia and openly condemning Russia's positioning of nuclear weapons in Belarus. We also have Iran testing its military muscle by having a successful ballistic missile test with a 2,000-kilometer range. This is a significant development in the Iranian ballistic missile program. So if you're interested in getting the week's summaries of the stories you need to know, go to the strategicsitrep.com/subscribe. Link is in the description. Okay, let's talk about what in God's name is going on in Russia. So first off, former Russian Defense Ministry for Logistics, Mikhail Mintintsev, is now, of course, deputy chief of the Wagner Group. He probably was filtering some in his role as a defense logistics officer, was probably helping Wagner get a lot of those artillery shells that they complained so much about. But what's more significant is the beef between Prigozhin and former Russian intel officer Igor Girkin. Girkin has said that has accused Prigozhin of wanting to or being able to stage a military coup against the Kremlin. And Prigozhin responded that that's not likely because Wagner doesn't have enough people. Prigozhin stated that there are different types of coups around the world. He pointed to a chaotic military coup in Sudan, and his argument against them was that they take too long and often result in major conflicts. He argued that Wagner doesn't have a large enough army to carry out a coup and claimed Wagner has good relations with President Putin. Prigozhin also vaguely implied that the Russian defense minister Shoigu instead could stage a coup since he has access to Russian special forces troops. Prigozhin added that while some individuals in Russia are expecting a revolution, Wagner is only advocating for select corrections to the Russian system. This is an unusual admission. First, he's talking openly that some people do expect Wagner to lead a revolution. And if you are someone whose ego is already sort of unchecked, just admitting that some people want Wagner to stage a revolution is pretty crazy. And admitting that he wants to conduct reforms to the Russian system is also pretty tremendous, right? This is someone who owns a security company, basically, saying that they want to make, he says select corrections, but substantial changes to Russia on a systemic level. This is a crazy admission. And it's probably the first time we've really seen Prigozhin admit that he wants to change Russia domestically. And he also, of course, points out that his biggest constraint is actually the lack of personnel, which itself is pretty interesting. Again, given that he has, we could see that the Russian Ministry of Defense has expended a lot of Wagner personnel taking Bakhmut, grinding out a potential political rival who now admits that they were probably right to do so. So, in further discussions, right now, Prigozhin also, of course, trolls out his standard conspiracy theories, stating that there's an effort in Russia to avoid recognizing the legitimate heroes of the war, and that, quote, the officials and bureaucrats who run the Russian state today must remain the heroes, and they are the only ones who can be thanked. And if they aren't thanked, then you say, fine, heck with it, praise the president, implying that Putin receives unearned praise thanks to the unwillingness of Russian bureaucrats to honor those who truly deserve it. Prigozhin, the ISW points out that Prigozhin has dramatically increased the direct references to Putin since May 9th, after he indirectly criticized Putin during the Victory Day holiday. And I suspect what Prigozhin is probably doing is testing boundaries. And as you can see, he tested these boundaries weeks ago, earlier in the month, and found that nothing happened. And to his shock, he keeps walking. It's sort of like in Indiana Jones, where he comes to the cliff and then he takes one cautious step over and finds that he's able to walk across the bridge. And so then he takes another and another and another. And that, I think, is what you're seeing Prigozhin do. I think he is shocked that he is discovering just how much leverage he has and just how impotent the Kremlin is, given their inability to achieve any battlefield effects in this war, and that even a catering company owner like Prigozhin is able to be one of the most effective battlefield forces in this war. And so, again, he's at a point where he is talking openly about revolution, and it doesn't seem like anyone in the Russian state is willing to or can stop him, which itself is pretty unbelievable. Anyway, guys, that's all I had for you. Thank you guys, as always. Special thank you, of course, to the members of combatvetnews.com, our Colonel tier members, our Lieutenant tier members. Thank you guys so much for supporting me. And of course, if you want to join their ranks, the link to that is also in the description. I'll catch you guys in the next one.